The sun on Iridia Prime was merciless, drenching the junkyard world in molten hues of burnt orange and deep crimson. Beneath the rusted sky, Cara Devlin wiped sweat and grease from her forehead, her ragged cloth doing little to keep the dust at bay. She had once been a decorated nurse on a human starbase, but bureaucracy and endless rules had driven her away. Now she lived in solitude, far from the prying eyes of the Galactic Medical Authority, fixing battered starships instead of healing bodies. It was a life she had chosen, away from the wars, the politics, and the past she wanted to forget. Her workshop, a cobbled-together shelter built from the remnants of forgotten spacecraft, sat at the heart of an endless maze of twisted metal. Here, she spent her days repairing salvaged engines, bartering for spare parts, and minding her own damn business. That peace shattered with a sound, so faint, so fragile, she almost dismissed it as the desert wind. A whimper, soft, desperate. Cara stiffened, heart quickening. She set down her tools and followed the sound, her instincts, ones she had buried long ago, urging her forward. She rounded the side of a crumbling cargo vessel and stopped cold. Beneath a rusted engine core, half buried in the sand, lay a creature. A small alien pup, its silver-white fur stained with grime and oil, its body trembling from exhaustion. Its eyes, a striking shade of crystal violet, blinked up at her, clouded with weakness. Cara knelt immediately. It tried to recoil, but it lacked the strength. Instead, it let out another soft whimper, a sound that cut straight through her chest. She had seen suffering before, but never like this. Never so helplessly abandoned. "Hey there, sweetheart," she whispered, reaching out slowly. The pup tried, weakly, to shrink away, but gave up almost instantly. Its body was too frail to resist. Cara felt something inside her unravel. The memories came rushing back. The faces of patients she couldn't save. The rules she had broken. The punishment she had faced for trying to help. She pushed those thoughts down. This wasn't about her. She scooped the tiny creature into her arms, feeling the rapid, uneven rise and fall of its breathing. It was barely holding on. The workshop wasn't equipped for this kind of emergency. No proper medical supplies, no sterile equipment. But Cara had learned long ago that desperation made do. She carried the pup inside, laying it gently onto a makeshift cot. Then she got to work. She improvised, cobbling together what little she had: antibiotics meant for humans, emergency hydration packs, her last precious vial of broad-spectrum medicine. For hours, she worked in silence, her hands moving instinctively. She had spent years fixing ships, but fixing lives was what she had once been trained to do. The sun dipped below the horizon by the time she finished. The pup was stable, breathing evenly, safe. Cara let out a slow breath and sank down beside it, exhaustion washing over her. She had done it, but she also knew what it meant. Her hands trembled as she wiped the sweat from her brow. She had broken the first law of the Galactic Medical Authority: no unauthorized treatment of alien species. If word got out, the consequences would be severe. Cara closed her eyes, listening to the steady breathing of the tiny life she had just saved. It was worth it, even if it cost her everything. The first rays of dawn crept through the slanted panels of Cara's workshop, painting long streaks of gold and copper across the scattered tools and metal scraps. The desert world of Iridia Prime never truly slept, but for a moment in the stillness of morning, the junkyard seemed peaceful. Cara sat cross-legged on the floor, her back against a rusted control panel, arms folded as she stared at the tiny alien pup curled up on the cot beside her. It was still alive. That should have been enough to let her rest, but the weight pressing on her chest refused to lift. She had made a choice last night, and she knew. Choices had consequences. The pup's breathing had stabilized, its once labored gasps now slow and rhythmic. Its violet eyes, unnervingly intelligent, fluttered open for a moment before exhaustion dragged it back under. Cara's fingers brushed across the thin amulet looped around its neck. She had almost overlooked it while cleaning the grime from its fur. It was small, barely the size of her thumb, made of a dark, crystalline metal that gleamed faintly under the workshop's dim lights. It was valuable, and valuable things had a way of attracting the worst kinds of people. Her gut twisted. She had no idea what she had just gotten herself into. Cara exhaled and rubbed her temples. She could have walked away, left the pup there, ignored its suffering, let nature take its course. It wasn't her problem, but she had known, the moment she picked it up, that she had signed herself up for something bigger than just a rescue. She just didn't expect the trouble to arrive so soon. A sharp knock rattled the metal door of her workshop. Cara's spine went rigid. She was on her feet in an instant, crossing the room quickly but silently, her hand drifting toward the modified plasma cutter she kept strapped under her work table. The knocking came again, louder, more forceful. Her instincts screamed at her. Don't answer it. She ignored them. She swung the door open just enough to see who it was. Her stomach dropped. Standing at her doorstep, arms folded across his broad chest, was Jareth Carden, the overseer of Iridia's salvage guild and her former employer at the local medical facility. Behind him stood two heavily armed enforcers, their plated body armor dull with dust. Cara tightened her grip on the doorframe, keeping her face neutral. Jareth, she said evenly. Didn't expect you to come knocking this early. He looked past her, trying to peer inside the workshop, but she stood firm, blocking his view. Jareth was a man who always looked tired, like life had worn him down and never stopped. His once dark hair was streaked with gray, and deep lines carved his face, but his eyes remained sharp. And right now, those eyes were filled with suspicion. I heard you took in a stray, he said flatly. Cara didn't flinch. I take in a lot of things. You'll have to be more specific. Jareth exhaled, clearly irritated. Cut the act, Devlin. You were seen carrying something back from the ship graveyard last night. Something. Alive. Cara's pulse spiked, but she didn't let it show. She tilted her head, feigning confusion. Since when does the guild care about dying animals? Jareth's expression hardened. You know the law, Cara. Unauthorized medical treatment of alien species is a violation. You've already got one strike on your record. This'll be the last. Her fists clenched. So what? You're here to drag me in? Jareth glanced over his shoulder at the two enforcers, then sighed. I don't want to, but I don't have a choice. I already filed a report. A sharp bolt of anger shot through her. Of course he had. You always did have a habit of screwing over the people who trusted you, she muttered. Jareth flinched just a little. It's not like that. No? She stepped closer, dropping her voice. Then what is it like, Jareth? Because it looks a hell of a lot like you throwing me to the wolves. Jareth rubbed a hand down his face. Damn it, Cara. This isn't personal. The guild doesn't tolerate violations. If they find out you... I saved a life. She didn't shout it, didn't yell, but her words carried weight. Jareth exhaled slowly, shaking his head. You don't understand what you've done. Cara's patience snapped. Then explain it to me. He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, and that was all she needed to know. He was scared, not just for her, for himself. Before she could press further, a sound owed from inside the workshop. A soft, high-pitched whimper. Jareth's eyes flickered toward the doorway, and suddenly everything changed. His entire demeanor shifted. The tired irritation vanished. Something sharper took its place. Recognition, realization, fear. He stepped back, jaw tightening. His hand drifted toward the sidearm holstered at his hip. And just like that, Cara knew. This wasn't just about a violation. This was about something bigger. Jareth had expected to find a random alien stray in her care. But now he knew exactly what it was, or rather, who. Cara's blood ran cold. Jareth opened his mouth, but before he could say anything, the pup stirred again, its tiny body shifting restlessly on the cot. Then, slowly, weakly, it lifted its head. Its violet eyes locked onto Jareth's. For a single agonizing second, no one moved. Then Jareth whispered, barely audible, "Oh, hell." Cara's stomach clenched. This wasn't just a lost alien, and Jareth knew exactly why. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "You don't know what you have." Cara didn't blink. "Then tell me." Jareth ran a hand down his face, glancing at the enforcers behind him. "Not here. Not with them." Cara studied him carefully. He looked desperate. For once, the calculating overseer wasn't in control, and that terrified her more than anything else. She exhaled slowly and opened the door just enough to let him through. The enforcers tensed, but Jareth held up a hand, signaling them to stay put. Cara stepped aside, allowing him to enter. Jareth's gaze immediately fell on the pup, and his face went ashen. "Stars help us," he whispered. "You have no idea what you've just done." Jareth stood frozen, his face pale, his breath shallow. His eyes locked onto the tiny creature resting on Cara's cot, the same pup she had risked everything to save. And he looked terrified. Cara crossed her arms, forcing herself to appear calm, even as her pulse pounded in her throat. "I need you to start talking, Jareth," she said, her voice low. "Now." He tore his gaze away from the pup, jaw clenched tight. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, barely above a whisper. "That's not just any alien." Cara exhaled sharply. "Yeah, I figured that much when you looked like you saw a ghost." Jareth shot her a glare, but it was shaken. "You don't get it, Devlin. That's a Lunari heir." The name sent a chill down Cara's spine. Lunari. Even here, on a backwater salvage world like Iridia Prime, the name carried weight. The Lunari were one of the most powerful alien dynasties in the known galaxy. Wealthy, influential, ruling over countless planets and systems. And their royal line? Strictly guarded. Cara's gaze drifted down to the small, sleeping pup. It looked so small, so helpless. Could this tiny creature really be royalty? Jareth took a deep breath, rubbing his temples. "Look, I don't know how we got here, but what I do know is that if the Lunari find out their heir was abandoned, left to die, this entire planet is screwed." Cara frowned. "Why?" Jareth's expression darkened. "Because this isn't just a rescue story, Devlin. This is a kidnapping." The words landed like a punch to the gut. She stared at him. "Kidnapped?" Jareth nodded grimly. "If the royal heir was stolen and dumped here, someone wanted him dead. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing." A heavy silence filled the workshop. Cara's hands curled into fists. She had just wanted to save a life, and now she was tangled in something much, much bigger than herself. Her gaze flickered back to the pup. It whimpered softly, stirring in its sleep, and, without thinking, she reached out and ran a gentle hand through its soft fur. It relaxed under her touch. Something hot and protective burned in her chest. She had spent her life running, from the military, from the Galactic Medical Authority, from her past. But this time she wasn't going anywhere. She took a slow, steadying breath. "All right," she said. "What do we do?" Jareth blinked, caught off guard. "What?" She turned back to him, steel in her voice. "I said, what do we do?" Jareth hesitated, then let out a breathless laugh. "You're serious?" Cara arched a brow. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Jareth's eyes flickered between her and the pup. Then he sighed. "Fine," he muttered. "First, we need to keep him hidden. If the wrong people find out he's here, it won't just be the Lunari we have to worry about. It'll be whoever stole him in the first place." Cara nodded. "And then?" Jareth exhaled. "Then we figure out how the hell we get him back to his people, without getting ourselves killed in the process." A loud, sharp bang echoed through the air outside. Jareth and Cara both spun toward the door. The pup's ears twitched, its body tensing. Cara's gut twisted. Someone was here, and from the sound of it, they weren't friendly. Jareth cursed under his breath. "We don't have time for this." Cara grabbed her plasma cutter and pulled it free from under the workbench. Her mind was already moving, working through the worst-case scenarios. She had buried plenty of explosives under the workshop's perimeter. If things went south, she could set off a controlled collapse to buy time. But she needed to know who they were dealing with first. She moved toward the window, peering outside. Her stomach dropped. A war mech stood just beyond the workshop, its rusted plating covered in scavenger insignias. And standing at the front of the group, a cruel smirk on his face, was Aaron Kale, leader of Iridia's most ruthless gang of salvagers. Aaron tapped the side of his rifle casually. His voice rang out across the scrap-littered yard. "Come on out, Devlin," he called, grinning. "Let's not make this difficult." Jareth swore violently under his breath. Cara's grip on her plasma cutter tightened. This wasn't a coincidence. They knew. Somehow, some way, Aaron had figured out that she had something valuable. And he had come to take it. Her jaw set. Not happening. She turned back to Jareth. "You got a weapon?" Jareth pulled a small energy pistol from his belt. "Nothing that'll do much against a mech." Cara's mind whirred. She needed a plan. Fast. The pup stirred weakly, curling against her side, and a fresh wave of determination crashed over her. She wasn't going to let them take him. She wasn't going to let him be abandoned again. She turned back toward the door. Her heartbeat steadied. If Aaron wanted a fight, she'd damn well give him one. The workshop trembled as Aaron's war mech took another step forward, its heavy metal frame groaning under the weight of its patchwork armor. Dust and loose debris rattled from the walls as Cara and Jareth locked eyes. "We need to move," Jareth hissed, his fingers white-knuckling his pistol. Cara's mind was already calculating the odds. Aaron wasn't alone. She could hear the heavy footfalls of at least half a dozen scavengers, their rifles primed and ready, but the real problem was the mech. The reinforced plating, the heavy-duty cannons mounted on its shoulders, it was a walking fortress. And her little scrap shop? It wouldn't survive a full barrage. Aaron's voice rang out again, mocking and cruel. "Come on, Devlin," he called, tapping his rifle against the mech's armored leg. "No need for this to get messy. Just hand over whatever fancy little gift the Lunari left behind, and we'll be on our way." Cara's stomach dropped. He knew. Not just that she had something valuable, but exactly who it belonged to. That meant he had intel, connections, and that meant the people who took the Lunari Heir in the first place weren't far behind. She swallowed hard, her hand hovering over the small detonator strapped to her belt. Aaron took a slow step forward, his smirk widening. "You really want to die over some alien brat, Devlin?" he sneered. "You and I both know how this ends, so why don't you make this easier on yourself?" Cara exhaled slowly. Then she pressed the detonator. A series of explosions tore through the ground beneath the mech, blasting up chunks of rock and twisted metal. The shockwave sent scavengers flying, knocking them flat as the war mech lurched violently. Aaron cursed as the massive machine staggered, its metal legs struggling to stabilize on the collapsing ground. Jareth spun to Cara, eyes wide. "You had explosives buried under your own workshop?" Cara shrugged. "I don't trust people." Jareth muttered something that sounded a lot like insane, but he didn't argue. Instead, he yanked her toward the back exit, gun at the ready. They ran, moving through the maze of rusted ship hulls and half-buried wreckage behind the workshop. Cara could hear shouts and gunfire behind them as Aaron's men regrouped. A pulse of fear shot through her, as she cradled the pup close to her chest. The Heir. She couldn't let them take him. Wouldn't. Jareth skidded to a halt behind a derelict cruiser, his chest heaving. We're not going to make it far on foot. We need an exit, fast. Cara's mind raced. Then she spotted it. An old, half-buried speeder in the wreckage, a vehicle she had scavenged for parts months ago. It was beat to hell, but if she could jumpstart the reactor, it might be enough to get them the hell out of here. She bolted toward it, Jareth cursing but following behind. "Cover me," she snapped, yanking open the control panel and ripping out the rusted wiring. Jareth pivoted, firing warning shots toward the scavengers as they closed in. The pup whimpered softly, pressing against her chest. Cara gritted her teeth, rewiring as fast as she could, her fingers flying over the controls. Behind her, the war mech roared back to life. Aaron's furious voice echoed across the battlefield. "Light 'em up?" The shoulder cannons whined as they charged up. Boom. A sudden shockwave blasted through the air, cutting off Aaron's command. Cara's head snapped up just in time to see a new set of stars cutting through the thick, dusty sky. And her heart stopped. Lunari warships. Sleek, elegant, deadly. And leading them, descending from the largest ship, was a figure cloaked in dark, regal robes, lined with silver embroidery. His violet eyes glowed beneath the ship's lights, his presence commanding, powerful, absolute. Prince Vailor. The pup in Cara's arms stirred weakly, ears twitching. Then, slowly, it lifted its tiny head and looked at the figure standing before them. And for the first time since she had found him, the pup made a sound that wasn't a whimper, a small, soft cry. Prince Vailor's expression shifted, the hardened mask of royalty cracking just slightly with something raw, something that looked painfully human. "Eric's," he whispered. And just like that, Cara knew. This wasn't just a rescued alien. This was his son, the last heir to the Lunari throne. The prince moved swiftly, his cloak billowing as he closed the distance between them. He knelt, not as a ruler but as a father, his hands trembling as he gently took the small, frail pup into his arms. Eric's curled against him immediately, tiny body shivering but safe. A lump formed in Cara's throat. She had spent weeks protecting this little creature, holding him, healing him. And now, just like that, he was going home. She should have felt relief. Instead, it felt like loss. Vailor rose, his arms still cradling his son, and his gaze locked onto her. "You saved him," he said, his voice quiet but heavy. Cara exhaled, rubbing the back of her neck. Didn't really feel like a choice. The prince studied her, something unreadable flickering in his expression. "You don't understand what you've done," he said finally. Cara frowned. "You're welcome?" Vailor huffed a quiet laugh, a small, almost reluctant thing. Then, his expression darkened as he turned toward Aaron's gang. His soldiers stepped forward in unison, weapons trained on the scavengers. Aaron, for the first time since she had met him, looked afraid. The prince's voice was calm, dangerous, absolute. "You would dare threaten the house of Lunari?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. Aaron swallowed. "Now listen, Prince." Vailor raised a hand, and the Lunari soldiers fired. The scavengers scattered, their forces decimated in mere seconds. Aaron, bleeding, limping, defeated, turned and fled into the wreckage, disappearing into the ruins of Iridia Prime. Vailor exhaled sharply, then turned back to Cara. "You are not safe here anymore," he said simply. Cara folded her arms. "Yeah, figured that one out myself." Vailor studied her for a long moment. Then he spoke. "I would have you serve in my house." Cara blinked. "What?" He lifted his chin. "You saved my son. He is bonded to you. I will not take that from him." His violet eyes burned into hers. "I would have you protect him." Cara stared. She had spent her life in junkyards, fixing broken machines, keeping her head down. And now, she was being asked to guard an alien prince. Her gaze flickered down to Eric's, who was curled against Violar's chest. He looked at her with those same violet eyes. And suddenly she knew. There had never really been a choice. She exhaled. "Well then," she muttered, "guess I better pack my things."